If you want to talk cake, and I'm not going to get into it. I know it'll bother you because it always does. But if you have not watched The Food That Built America, they just did an episode 2 weeks ago on the history of Betty Crocker and Duncan Hines. Let me tell you, it was fascinating.
It does not bother me.
I had no idea who Duncan Hines really was to this country. Do you know much about Duncan Hines?
No.
Really?
I mean, other than he had a very popular line of bakery.
He did, let me tell you, he was not a baker, and he had nothing to do with cake. But he was the guy who had developed a reputation for traveling the country and writing a book about the places you should eat at as you went. He was the original Zagat. And he'd go, and it was called like Good Eating on the Road. And you can look at it. I went and bought a 1955 edition of it. But he had established such credibility with the public.
So this was more, the cakes were more of a spin-off of the travel books?
Some guy who was trying to do some business for some local farmers who were making flour wanted to put out a competing product to Betty Crocker, and got an idea. It was maybe one of the first uses of a true influencer, and thought, you know what? If we approach Duncan Hines with this, his name has so much credibility in the food space that it would launch it. So they told him that he would have final say over any product that bore his name. So he agreed to do it. As soon as that product was released with his name, within 2 weeks he had 48% of the market share. That's how much credibility.
But wasn't it predominantly bakery
kept? No, it's cake mix. Always cake mix.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It was primarily baking stuff.
Yeah, it's cake mix is where it got started. You know, Betty Crocker, her version, you only had to add water, and it was very successful. But his version, you had to add a couple of eggs, which they thought was actually going to hurt. But as it turns out, actually gave people who were making cake the sense that they were baking it from scratch.
You may think this is silly, but I always thought she was hot.
Who?
Betty Crocker.
There's actually not a real Betty Crocker.
Well, they had a picture.
Back in his day, there was.
I mean, I didn't date her or anything, but I saw it. I go to
Mrs. Fields was a real person.
Who?
Mrs. Fields.
She was good looking too.
She was.
Ron, as a matter of fact, they had a Mrs. Fields, I believe.
Oh, that's right.
For a while, yeah. You know, Mrs. Fields, they were the first cookie place that ever sold in malls, and not like in the food court, but walk through malls.
They didn't have a Mrs.
They had
Fields.
cookies and more.
They had their own.
No, Mrs. Fields was a real person.
No. I'm saying Ron's stores were cookies and more. Did he also own a Mrs.
There was
Fields
some
at one point?
connection. I think maybe I think they
sold.
They
sold it to
that's
Mrs.
what it
Fields.
was.
There
Little history there,
folks. We got there eventually.
I don't hate when you bring this stuff up. Don't mistake material that I am able to make fun of you about for me not liking it. I actually love it and find it fascinating.
It is fascinating.
But it's also fun.
It's a great show to watch because it covers two areas that fascinate me, which is business.
Yeah.
And it really is more a show about business because it's about competition and innovation and what happens when, two different giants kind of compete for the same turf. But then it's also about food. Yeah. So between the two things, I mean, it scratches right where I itch. It's a great show.